My guest is a heroin user. So what comes to your mind? Are you thinking male or female? Do you think my guest is young or old? Do you think my guest is clean or dirty? Educated? Employed? In a stable relationship? Do you think that my guest has children? That my guest is urban or rural? How about the race of my guest, knowing only that my guest is a heroin user? Do you think that my guest has track marks? Dr. Carl Hart is about to change all of your perceptions. He's written a brand new book. It's called Drug Use for Grown-Ups, Chasing Liberty in the Land of Fear. He's the Ziff Professor of Psychology in the departments of psychology and psychiatry at Columbia. He's one of the world's experts on the side effects of recreational drugs. And as I say, he's not just an observer, he is a recreational user. Dr. Hart, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
So I began your book on Saturday night. I used Instagram to convey to everybody that I was sipping Jack Daniels as I was enjoying what you've written. Why does society perceive your behavior as so much more threatening than mine?
Well, that's a loaded question. I mean, I'm a black male with dreadlocks, and so we can get into that issue. There's a wide range of reasons. I mean, American racism and so forth. But I think you're talking about the drug issue, the fact that
yes,
I identified as being a heroin user or someone who used heroin, just to set the record straight. That's not the extent of who I am. You named all these other things that I am: a professor, a father, a husband, all these things. Now, people wanted to focus on the heroin use, and I wanted them to actually at some level, but don't get it twisted. It's not like that I have track marks or I use heroin intravenously or every day. I'm an occasional but regular user. That's the same with my alcohol use. So I want people to understand that these things, heroin, cocaine, MDMA, all of these drugs can be used and are used in that way, but society only portrays something like heroin use as some everyday frequent use, and it's done by somebody who is in need of obviously psychological help, or somebody who's truly disturbed. And I'm trying to highlight that is a misnomer, that is inaccurate. That may characterize a small group of users, but it doesn't characterize the majority of users. And I'm trying to ask society to think about this differently. If we think about it differently, maybe it will help us to rethink what we're doing with drug policy, because what we're doing with drug policy is actually killing people.
So I approached the book, I think, in the right frame of mind, which was to say, this is going to require me to wipe the slate clean and forget everything I think I know, which, by the way, is damn little, about this subject, and to be open-minded to what you are arguing, which is that most heroin users, I mean, you say you're not a one-off, I'm paraphrasing, but rather most heroin users are conscientious and upstanding. Give us the short version of that argument.
Yeah, in the book, I described, for example, these programs in Switzerland. I went over and spent a sabbatical, and I worked in Switzerland, where people come to the clinic every day, twice a day, folks who meet criteria for heroin addiction. By the way, I don't meet those criteria, but these folks, they get heroin twice a day, every day, in the morning and in the evening. And these people show up on time. Most of them work. They all have housing. They are responsible, happy citizens. And this evidence is not new. They've been doing this for more than 20 years. They also do it in the Netherlands and other countries. And so I tried to get the reader to see in the book that in America, our view of heroin is warped, and it's been warped by documentary filmmakers, the media, and so forth. And I hope that people do as you did, come to my book with an open heart, and hopefully they're able to learn some new information.
I'm going to read from page 236. My friend Kristen asked if I would be interested in trying heroin with her. She had never done it, but wanted to try it. Same here. So one Friday evening, we did. Unlike in the movies, we didn't use needles, by the way, nor do most heroin users. We each snorted a short, thin line. Immediately, we detected the nice, characteristic opioid effects, including a dreamy, light sedation, free of stress. We talked, reminisced, laughed, exchanged ideas, and carefully documented our drug effect. After they had worn off, we called it an evening, and we went home. That was the first time, right? How often in the last 5 years would you say you do use heroin, and how difficult is it for you to get access?
Well, we're in a pandemic, right? So, like everybody, I'm locked down, and I haven't used in this pandemic because I haven't been able to leave the country or what have you. In the United States, we don't have these things where they call them drug checking facilities, where you can go and have your drug tested for purity to make sure it doesn't contain any contaminants that might be dangerous. Given that that's the case, the endeavor of using street heroin in the United States become dramatically more potentially dangerous. And so since we're in a pandemic, I haven't had an opportunity to use any heroin because I don't trust the street heroin, and I don't recommend that people take street heroin. I recommend that in the United States, we implement these drug checking facilities. So it would go a long way in decreasing overdoses that occur primarily or largely because of heroin and other drugs containing contaminants. And so my heroin use, as I said, it's like my alcohol use. It's regular but infrequent. And it also, it's really contingent upon like the country that I'm in too. In the United States, you can go to jail in places like Portugal or Spain. Using personal amounts of drugs like heroin is not a criminal offense.
Dr. Clark, in making your argument, you wrap yourself in the American flag. And by that, I mean that you cite the Declaration of Independence and, by the way, point out that its author was himself a drug user. I guess for Jefferson, what was it of choice? Opium?
Yes, Jefferson loved his opium or opium-based laudanum. And so the Declaration of Independence, this is a real sad fact about America and us as Americans. They make us learn the Declaration of Independence, the three promises that we all get at birthright as a birthright: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, meaning that we can live our life as we see fit, so long as we don't disrupt other people from doing the same. That is profound. The problem is that statement, that profound statement, is lost on the 12-year-olds that they make learn this sort of stuff. And then as you get to be an adult, you forget that you have that birthright as long as you don't mess with anyone else. So how and why is the government telling me, you, what you can put in your bodies, what you decide to put in your body for your own pleasure, as long as you're not messing with anybody else?
You make a rather libertarian pitch in the book. I don't know if you see it that way, but here's what I thought was a really interesting argument that you make. You say, if we're talking about recreational drugs providing some benefit, and I think of weed in this sense as providing like a medicinal relief, maybe for a cancer patient. In this country today, there's pretty much no debate. It's like, hey, if that's going to help somebody get through chemo or radiation, my God, give it to them. But we are unaccepting of the argument, I just want to get high.
Yeah, that's right. That is exactly right. And when we think about, like you said, this is seen as a libertarian argument, the argument that I'm making. You know, again, that speaks to the limited sort of education of Americans. That's not a libertarian argument. That's an American argument. That's the first promise of the country. That's the first ideal of the country. Those are the first noble principles. That means that's what it means to be an American, not a libertarian, not a Democrat, not a Republican. That's Americanism, not libertarianism. And so I don't particularly like being in political camps because I don't like being on a football team. I like the choice of being able to take the good from here and get rid of the bad from those places. So I don't want to be like closed in on those camps. But you've raised an interesting point about Americans sort of uncomfortable feelings surrounding pleasure. It's like you can't say that, no, I'm chilling, I'm having a good time. That's why I'm doing this. That is a good thing. Pleasure is a good thing.
You can say it about alcohol. Yeah, you can say it about the Jack Daniels that I was enjoying when I was reading your book, but you can't say it about the recreational drugs.
That's exactly right. And there's something wrong with that hypocrisy. And that's why I tried to point out in the book that pleasure is a good thing. If we are feeling better, we're more likely to treat other people better. And that's a good thing. We want to make sure that we are generous and caring and supportive of other people. When I'm feeling good, I'm more likely to engage in those pro-social behaviors. And so I'm asking Americans in this book to embrace pleasure.
So one of the lines in the book is going to lead me to an area we must cover while we're still together. I imagine some people are already driving off the road as they're listening to this dialogue. You say, quote unquote, much of the reporting on opioids is bullshit. I have to believe that many are listening to us and they're saying, hey, whoa, I lost someone to an opioid addiction, or I've got a son or a daughter or a niece, and they're struggling. Like, what is this guy? What is this doctor saying vis-a-vis that pain and that anguish and that addiction? So set the record straight.
Yeah, so to be clear now, I've lost somebody as a result of opioid, or what's been called an opioid overdose. I understand that pain, and I have parents who come to me and I try to help them understand what happened with their kid related to this subject. So I completely understand that. But what I'm saying in the book, the argument that I'm making, it's first of all, we have to separate what we're talking about when we talk about the opioid crisis. Are we talking about overdoses, or are we talking about addiction? They're not the same. And so let's talk about them in those separate ways. The major concern is overdose for me because people can die and they're no longer with us. So if we think about overdoses, the vast majority of overdoses occur for two reasons. People have tainted opioids. They thought they had heroin, and they have something like fentanyl, which is a lot more potent and increases the likelihood of people dying. And another reason that they're dying is because they combine opioids with another sedative like alcohol or benzodiazepine, particularly the older ones like promethazine. But any sedatives increase the respiratory depression effects produced by opioids. So if you want to solve those problems, if you want to solve overdose, all you have to do is have drug checking facilities where people can submit small samples of their drug and have it tested anonymously and free for any adulterants, any contaminants, because if they contain contaminants, the printout that they receive back will tell them and they will know not to take it. And another thing we can do is to have public service announcements saying, plenty of public service announcements saying, if you're going to use opioid, especially if you are a relatively new user, don't combine it with another sedative. If we do those two things, we can dramatically decrease the number of overdoses in this country. This is so simple. They do this in Barcelona or in Spain, in the Netherlands, in Austria. They do it in a number of other countries. We have the technology, we have the money, but we just don't do it.
So let me reveal my naivete even further. I was raised to believe that if you ever did heroin from Jump Street, you are hooked and you are addicted. Did I watch too many movies? Have I seen New Jack City too many times?
You certainly have watched too many bad American movies about drugs. And I talk about New Jack City in the book. I talk about meeting the writer and having a good time with that person. And we talk about
a lumberjack.
That's right. Tom Wright from Iowa. We talk about how that story just went off the rails, basically. So please read the book and you'll hear some interesting anecdotes about New Jack City. Of course, there is no drug that one takes and is addicted at the one hit. By definition, addiction requires work. And so if somebody is telling you that a drug produces addiction at the one hit, you can stop listening, because either they are an idiot or they think you are an idiot. In either case, you shouldn't listen to that.
Dr. Clark, the very first words in your book, quote, "This is not a book about promoting drug use." I doubt that even though you said it and you said it first, that's going to change minds of people who read it or hear this and will come to the conclusion that you just want to green light everything. So before you leave me, give me the parameters. What exactly are you saying and what aren't you saying? Big picture.
Well, the book is called Drug Use for Grown-Ups, Chasing Liberty in the Land of Free. So this is for grown-ups, and I explain what I mean when I say grown-ups. People who are responsible, they look after themselves, they look after their family. Now, I want people to understand too that this is not a static sort of status. Being a grown-up is a difficult thing to achieve. And, you know, you may sometimes have problems in your life and you go back and forth, but that's okay. That's all of us. But what I'm asking folks to do here is that if you engage in drug taking behavior or any particularly risky behavior, you have to be responsible, because if you're not, there is a likelihood, there is a chance that you will probably get in trouble with this activity. So I'm trying to make that very clear. And I'm also saying that if you have co-occurring psychiatric illnesses and those sort of issues, this book may not be for you. And in the Chasing Liberty portion, I'm asking people to consider their own liberty using the topic of drugs. I'm asking people to really understand what it means to be an American. And what it means is that you have these three birthrights. And then in the Declaration of Independence, it also says that governments should be established to secure those rights. When governments fail to do that, governments should be disbanded. And so if people understood that, then they would understand that they have control over their lives, over their bodies, as long as they're not bothering other people.
Final thought. I shared at family dinner. Our sons are 20-somethings who should be out at a college campus or grad school, but are back under our roof these days. I shared the premise of the book and used you as a conversation at family dinner the other night. And one of the boys said, after hearing what I had to say about Dr. Clark, quote, "Dad, that guy must have tenure." He made a real interesting point. What has been, and you do, at Columbia, but what has been the reaction thus far at your employer?
I don't know. I'm on sabbatical, and I'm really not concerned about that. You know, just think about that statement. All I am writing is truth based on my 30 years of experience of studying this subject. And now people would like to censor truth because it makes them uncomfortable. That's some shit for your ass, if that is the case. I mean, you know, you are supposed to be able to have this free exchange of ideas. And that's how I am behaving. I am, you know, if my ideas have weaknesses, please let me hear it. Let's have this discussion. I'm not married to any of these ideas. I'm married to the evidence. And if you have better evidence, then it dictates that I must follow.
The book is called Drug Use for Grown-Ups, Dr. Carl Hart. Dr. Hart, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.